Today is about WIOA. Some people say WIOA. I hate that name, you know, WIOA. But in any event, actually, you know, the real interesting reason it's called WIOA is here we were marching along doing our own good work, and then all of a sudden it was WIOA. We were shocked, you know, because we've been operating under the same piece of legislation since 1998, the Workforce Investment Act. 1998 was a long time ago. And actually the system has grown bigger than the law. And so what this law is trying to do is to catch up with us, if you will. What we're going to do today is really a number of different things. And if you want to follow along with me, here's the major purposes for our time with each other. We're going to talk about what's the same, what's different, and what's new. Now, everybody is always fascinated by what's new, but I'm sort of fascinated by what's the same. And to a large degree, you're going to hear that many of the things that you are currently doing in North Carolina is just right on the money. You know all that time we spent over the last couple of years on trying to become an even better system through integrated services delivery and ISD? It's almost like we knew the law was coming. And so for all of the heartache and the challenges that came with that, we should be like so thankful that we spent that time, because states that have not done so will have a great deal of challenge in terms of putting together the legislation. So while I will be talking about what's different, I don't want people to think that this is like night and day. There is a change here, but some of the changes are not as big as people think. Here's the story. The President signed the bill in January 22nd of 2014. According to the law, the Department of Labor was to give us draft regulations mid-January. Well, on January 5th, the Department of Labor said, we ain't going to make it. My favorite part of the notification, though, is that they go through this piece about that they're not going to meet their deadline. But then to the field, the memo said, but don't get your hopes up, because it's still going to have to be implemented on July 1st of 2015. So here we are at the beginning of February. We're about 5 months out, and not everything is clear. Now, we do have the law, and most of the law is clear, but you know how all this stuff goes. First, Congress has an opinion. Then the United States Department of Labor has an opinion. Then the North Carolina Department of Commerce has an opinion. Then the Workforce Board has an opinion. And then most of you get no opinion. Well, I'm just saying, you know. I'm just saying. So I'm going to tell you what the law says. But what we have to have as a major caveat today, that there are some things we will not yet know the answer to. Moreover, we'll have to be cognizant of the fact that some things might be minor tweaked by regulation, but that doesn't mean that we can't get started now. So I'm going to attempt to highlight those things that we can do right now to make sure that we get ready and do the best that we can. The law itself is 228 pages. I'm not going to either bore you or to try to even attempt to cover a great part of the law. I'm going to focus on that part that is the purpose of today, which has to do with centers, the customer flow within the center, and the adult and dislocated worker programs. And again, in a true integrated services delivery model that you've been implementing, the customer flow will not be that big. The eligibility is not really that big of a new thing. But there are some new, what they call career services, that are now going to be required to be provided through the system. And so we'll want to look at what those are, because these are new products in the product box for us. We will spend some time on the new performance standards. I was like, going to say performance standards, they're ready to remove. You know why? Because you've been electrically cattle-prodded so much about them, you know. But the new performance standards don't start until July 1st of 2016. Some of you might even die before then, you know what I mean? Anybody have anybody they hope will? All right, all right. So we'll spend a little time on that because you get like a preview. of coming attractions around it, but the performance standards are different. And the reason the performance standards are important is because they talk about the change in purpose. It's not just an accountability, but the change of purpose in the law. So we basically have three components for our time with each other. And as William says, we'll have a stretch break as we need it. The first section is about the big picture overview of WIOA. And actually, I know that many of you are probably more worried about the requirements, but I will tell you this, that the change here is at least as much conceptual as it is in a very specific kind of way. So what we're going to do is open up to talking about the big things that are trying to be accomplished here. And some of them may even be challenging things or almost impossible things. But I don't know about you. For me, I have to know where someone's coming from. And that's what we're really going to do, is to talk about where the legislation is coming from. And then that provides the context from which some of the details take place. So we're going to open with the big picture. Then we're going to move to some of the technical requirements around the center and around service delivery. And then we'll spend time on the performance standards, okay? One of the things I want to just say real quickly is that my goal is to dialogue with you. That means if you have something on your mind, you should raise your hand and let us know. That won't be an interruption, it'll be a gift. Because some of this stuff we just really need to think about. So that's what we're going to do. All right. Beginning on page 4, and this may be the most important page in the book, is the overview of what the law is attempting to accomplish. One of the things is that Congress and the administration want big change. And it's not because they necessarily think we have not done a good job. They want big change because they're attempting to change the legislation to reflect the reality of a new world. Anybody think there's been any changes since 1998? I mean, really. And so consequently, this update really in some ways is trying to catch up with us, because we had already moved beyond what the law had required to trying to be relevant. And this law is an attempt to make us even more relevant. And there are 4 major themes in the new law. The first theme has to do with partnership. And you don't have to write this down, but let me show you how this context fits. There are 4 titles to the new Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Title 1A has to do with the workforce boards, the state workforce board, the state plan, the local plan, all of that stuff. Then Title 1B is the WIOA, Adult Dislocated Worker and Youth Program. That is the first of what they call a core program partner. You see, in this law, not all partners are created equal. Some partners are considered to be absolutely key to success, and there's 4 of them. And the first one is Title I, the Adult Youth and Dislocated Worker Program. Title II of the law is the Adult Education and Literacy Program, and that is the second core partner. Title III is Wagner-Pizer, which is the state employment agency, and that is the third core partner. And the fourth partner is Vocational Rehabilitation, which is Title IV. So the law has 4 titles and 4 core partners. It's not that we have not had partnerships in the past, but this law envisions a much stronger kind of partnership. Remember when I told you were lucky here in North Carolina that we spent all that time on integrated services delivery? Because really what that was about was spending a whole lot of time about how we could get 2 of the core partners to work even closer together. And you know how we moved to co-enrollment and having shared staffing on services? They would like for us to do something similar, maybe to not the same depth, with the other 2 core partner programs. with adult education and with vocational rehabilitation. Now, this is not to say we do not currently have a partnership with them. As I understand it, adult education is run through the community college system in most cases here in North Carolina, and we probably have a relationship with them. We probably make referrals, we probably do all of those things. And then vocational rehabilitation, at least in some centers, they're a friendly visitor once a week. That is this level of partnership. They want us to go to this level of partnership. And the law does a number of things to strengthen the partnership. For the first time, all 4 core partner programs will basically have the same performance standards. And the reason that they do that is not just to compare how does one do with each other, but it is also because they want us to work off of a common purpose. And what I have found about partnership is many times, many people of goodwill really want to work with each other, but the legislation leads us down different paths. And consequently, what this law wants to do is to get us on the same path. And so I will refer to this throughout the day, but it's the first major thing they want us to accomplish, which is an enhanced partnership across the 4 core partner programs. The second major thrust is that we will want to continue to work with people that need our help. But we must make sure that we provide emphasis and access to those individuals who have the greatest challenges to employment. That includes people such as those that happen to have a disability, those that have been incarcerated, all of those customers that when they come to the center, that you go, oh my goodness, they got some problems. And it's not because they're bad people, it's just because they got challenges in the labor market. I will tell you something that's interesting to me about this, though, is that the unemployment rate is beginning to go down. I just read today that they announced that we created 275,000 jobs last month. I know a couple of years ago here in North Carolina, the unemployment rate was exceptionally high, but everybody agrees it's getting better. And here's the thing. When the unemployment rate goes down, the people we will serve by their very nature will have greater barriers. You know why? Because the people who have few barriers when the unemployment rate goes down tend to be able to get jobs. So the legislation says that we must leave no one behind and that we must provide access to everybody. But the reality is we're going to have a changing customer base. And we're not going to have time to do this today, but that has significant implications for your center because the kinds of workshops, the kinds of programs, and the kinds of services we deliver should be driven by the kind of customer who comes to the center. And so the legislation wants to make sure that we don't leave anybody behind. And you know what's going to happen? In the new performance standards, when they display the data of the new performance standards, every performance standard will not just be broken out in its aggregate, but will also be broken out by each characteristic of individuals who are most likely to have a barrier to employment. And that's a big thing, and it's actually to ensure that we give equal opportunity to everybody that comes into the center. So that's the second major change. The second major change is a focus on individuals who have challenges to employment. The third change is really the fourth and fifth bullet on the document together, and it has to do with program purpose. And this may be the biggest thing in the law. If I went to most staff people in most centers, and I said, what are we trying to do here? What are you trying to accomplish? What will most people say? Get them a job. Right? Absolutely. This law, though, says that's not enough. Because the reality is that this legislation wants people not just to get a job, but it wants people to get a good job. This is a big, big thing. You know, when people come into the center, any of you work at the front desk? We have any front desk people here? There'll be a place for you in heaven, not in this life, but in heaven you're going to have a special place. They're going to have a whole little greeting area just for you. And let me tell you, those people at the front desk, they're so polite, and they've all been trained to be really nice and everything, and they very nicely say to the person, "How may I help you?" And the person says, "I want you to give me a job." And then we've been trained, it's not my job to get you a job, it's your job to get your own job. We try to help people get jobs, but you've got to get your own job. You know what I'm saying? Well, see, here's the thing. They don't know how to ask the right question. See, what they really want to say is I want you to get me a better job than I could have gotten on my own. See, the value we add is not job getting. The value we add is when we help get something they couldn't have otherwise gotten. That's how Congress believes we earn our keep. Because if all we do is connect people up with jobs they could have already gotten, then why do they need us? So what the law believes is that we have a special need to help people do better. And this is a big thing because there's a very specific way they believe we help people do better. And it's not just getting people a job. It's about getting people the skills and education and credentials they need to get better jobs for a lifetime. This is a big, big thing because eventually what Congress would like is if I went to the center and I asked staff people why do they exist, they would go, to get people skills, to get them credentials, to get them good jobs for a lifetime. That's a big change. It's a big change. And here's the reasons why. First of all, we live in a funny world. Jobs disappear all the time. Everybody agree with me there is no job security in the new world? There is no job security. Here's the thing though. You can take a job away from me, but you can never take a credential away from me. You can take a job away from me, but you can never take a skill away from me. And the only thing that really exists is skill security because there's no job security. And what this law believes, that if all we do is to get someone a job, and particularly if it's not a good job, then we have an added value. And so the legislation refers to this as career pathways. And career pathways is throughout the entire legislation. And what is envisioned is that local workforce boards, working with local employers and with schools and with the core partner programs, will sit down and figure out what is the opportunity pathway for people to get ahead. The President's administration refers to this as stepping stones. And the way I always like to think about this is that I was born in Kentucky, I was raised in Ohio before I went to Massachusetts for 30 years before I now live in the land of sun, California. And when I was growing up in Ohio, we would frequently go down to my grandfather's farm in Kentucky, and I loved to play in the creek. I just think that's like a 5-year-old's dream. Get down, catch those crawdads, and do all that stuff, you know. And the creek had stones throughout it. And if you could just do it just right, you could jump from stone to stone to stone to get to the other side. Stepping stones, if you will. And what this law believes we're doing is we're creating stepping stones for folks. Now, sometimes when I was in the creek and I tried to move to a new stone, sometimes I fell. Sometimes I bloodied. Sometimes I just wallowed in mud. You have a visual, don't you? Yeah, absolutely. It looked good then. Anyway, and so, but then the idea was I had to pick up, get back on the stone, and keep moving. What career pathways are about is how people get ahead. And just to show you how this is beyond just a theoretic thing, because it plays itself out in the legislation, is you know that requirement that we have that everybody who we're going to work with in an intensive way has an individual employment plan? The law says that in the new IEP that it must include a career pathway. So you know where it now says what is your job goal? Well, you know what it is now. What is your jobs goal? And it's not just what you do next, it's what you're going to do next after what you do next. Because it moves it to a longer thing. This is really important in lots and lots of ways. The first thing, how many of you think career pathways are funny? You know, it's nice if you're just going to get on this like straight line, you know, you're going to get your CNA, then you're going to be an RN, then you're going to be a doctor, then you're going to be God, you know, and just moving on up, you know, all just straight thing. It doesn't always work that way. This morning in the youth session I was doing this, and I'm going to do it again. Here's how you know how funny career pathways are. I'm looking around the room with all you nice folks and all the nice work you do. I'd be willing to bet this. When you were about 5 and you went over to your Aunt Tilly's house, and Aunt Tilly looked at you and said, honey, what do you want to be when you grow up? I bet there's not a person in the room who said, a workforce professional. I bet you there ain't a one. So I'm always interested about how people get to the other side of the creek. You know, I mean, what causes one stone to be there and to take then a sort of a turn, and all some of you even move creeks. You know? Sir, do you mind? I'll pick on you for just a second. I'm not going to give you a hard time, but you're a big guy anyway. I ain't messing with you. All right, tell me. Well, do you mind if you just quickly started in high school and give me your career pathway? How did you get to this land of honey here?
Well, when I was in grad school, I had to take an internship.
Well, now start before grad school. Go. I want to hear high school.
Oh, high school?
No, I'm trying to get real dirt here. Yeah. Go. Yeah. But where'd you start? What happened in high school?
In high school, I went on to undergrad school at A&T. Mm-hmm. And then after A&T, I went to grad school and had to take an internship.
Had to take an internship, right? Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to get a job with the Employment Security Commission.
And that moves you over. Right. What'd you study at school?
History and political science.
Oh, that really prepares you for the employment. So just a perfect background, you know? Absolutely. Well, actually, you said something very important, buddy. We will see in career pathways here, we assume that there's a combination that makes a pathway work. It's education, it's credentials, and it's work experience. So really, your crossing into the field was through an internship, it wasn't through school. Is that right? The internship may have been a school, but it was the internship that drove the career path. And that's a big thing. We'll do one more. Who else am I going to pick on? No. Do you mind? If you don't want to, I'll just say no. Oh, come on, give it up. Tell me your high school career pathway.
Okay. I graduated from high school and I went to Winston State, major in history with a minor in political science.
I can't wait to hear this pathway map. Go on, yeah.
I taught for almost 14 years and wanted to have teaching, and ended up getting laid off from my previous job and found this job.
So, you fell off the rock. Actually, you didn't fall off the rock. Somebody shoved you off the rock. Ain't that the truth?
Yeah.
And so, but then you got back up. You got back up and you got another one. So here's the thing, is that, notice again, we had education, we had skills. Did you get a degree?
Yeah.
What's your degree in?
That's a science, so, you know.
Whatever. All right. I mean, I think that's good. I think that's good. But here's my point. That credential, they could never take away from you. They took your job away, but they never took your credential away. And actually, that was a pretty good path. Yeah, that was a pretty good path. All right. Here's the big thing here. Career pathways have three components. And they match the purposes of the legislation. Education, post-secondary credentials. Why post-secondary credentials? Well, because the following is true. That it used to be that if you had a high school diploma, you had something. And I'm not trying to belittle a high school diploma, but it's just the first stone. It's just the first step. And in the new world, you got to have more than that. So career pathways have three components. It has education, it has post-secondary credential, and it has, I think, most importantly, work experience. Education gets you an interview, but it's work experience that gets you a job. It's so funny. You know, like when you submit your resume online, however you do it, they all know about all your educational credentials. But when you go to the interview, almost nobody asks about that. Because that's almost just like an entry ritual. It's almost like just something that you got to do to pass the bar. But it doesn't necessarily mean you get the job. Because the job is all about your work experience. Our program is different than Pell Grants. Pell Grants might get you a credential, but without work experience, it doesn't mean you necessarily get a job. That's the reason why some of you have 26-year-olds sleeping on your couch with college degrees. Because you have a college degree, and I feel so sorry for young people. This is when young people go to an employer, and the employer says, I really like you. Too bad you don't have more work experience. Well, how do you ever get work experience if nobody ever gives you any? Right? So this is a huge shift. And you will see it in the performance standards. Because, you know, in the performance standards, if you get someone a job, and even if it is a good job, you meet 3 of the performance standards. But if someone doesn't get a credential, you don't meet that one at all. And this is a big thing because it fundamentally switches what we do. You know when people come to the front desk and say, I heard you could pay for me to go to school? I heard you could pay for me to go to school. Then we go, who told you that? And they go, my sister. Well, I told her not to tell you. Anyway, here's the thing about that. School is one component of what we do, but it's not all of what we do. All right, those partners, the core partners, in the adult education partner who does high school equivalency, they can get a high school equivalency, what people call a GED, but if they don't get a job, they don't meet their performance standards. Because in the new world, you don't just get one thing from us, you get a threefer. And that is a fundamental shift. Now, here's the thing about stepping stones. it is envisioned here that people don't leave us after one stone. Because we have to get people at least part of the way across the creek. We can't just get them to the one stone and have them exit, because then they got to move to another stone. And our job is to get them on those pathway of stones for a few. Now here's what's really important. What this means is they want us to work with people longer. Now that's all easy to say, but just so you know, I'm not entirely naive. It's nice that you're going to work with them longer, but some of them never wanted to see your ugly face to start with. Yeah. How may I help you? Oh, I got a letter. And my boyfriend's waiting in the car. Can we make this snappy? You know what I'm saying? And so this is a big thing. This is a big thing, because what they're asking us to do is to hang around with people who never desired to see us to start with. Now, that's not true of all people, right? But I will tell you what it means. It means that we have to have services that people want, that services that engage people, and keep people engaged for a longer period of time. One of the new performance standards is how are people doing 12 months after they leave the program. 12 months. You have to be like such a master stalker. And you know what? They'll probably get a restraining order on you. I mean, you'll have to be like a master stalker to try to track down people after 12 months with a change of cell phone number and a caller ID. So, you know what it means? It means that they can't exit until they are stabilized on a career path. That's a big thing. It's a big thing. I will tell you that some activities have greater retention than others. Work-based learning activities have higher retention than classroom-based training. How many of you personally learn better on the job than you do in the classroom? Anybody in the room? No, Jen. That's a learning style. That's a learning preference. I always like to tell about my nephew Justin, who's my favorite nephew because he's my only nephew. But he would be my favorite nephew anyway. After he got out of high school, he went to community college. He took the same math class 4 times. And he couldn't get it. So then he left, and he went into becoming an apprentice for welding, where you also have to learn math. But he now has completed his apprenticeship, is 26, and making $26 an hour and partying on down. Isn't it funny that for him, the pathway of credentialing was not school, but apprenticeship, because he learned at the workplace. This is really an important point, because the third major thrust here is better jobs through career pathways. And career pathways have 3 components: education, post-secondary credential, and employment. And it does not mean that every customer will achieve all 3 of those, but it means that our goal must be to seek that for every person who comes through the center. That's a big thing. You'll see it in the performance standards. You'll see it in the expectations of the individual employment plans, and you'll see it woven throughout all of the career services that are supposed to be provided. So we are being fundamentally transformed from just being a job-getting agency to becoming a career pathway agency. The fourth and final major trend, everybody tracking the 4? The first one was increased partnership. The second one was leave no one behind. That's the making sure we serve with equal access people with barriers to employment. The third one is career pathways. And the fourth one is employer engagement. Employer engagement is different than business services. You can have an employer you provide business services to that is not engaged. You can have an employer who's engaged to whom you do not provide business services. The law specifically states it is the responsibility of the local workforce board to engage employers. Engaging employers, well, there's three components that I will share with you, has the following broad definition. Employers must teach us how to do our work to prepare people for the labor market. That we can have the best ideas in the world, but if they are not designed around the parameters of what employers want, then we can't prepare. You know, it's just simple as this. If you're a manufacturer and I contract with you to provide a good, I get to dictate the terms of the manufacturing for the finishing product. Well, to the degree that we're the manufacturer of talent for employers, employers have to define the terms. This plays out in lots of ways, but there are three major components to employer engagement. The first component is employers informing us on program design and program content. The example I always like to use on this, and I hope no one takes this personally because it's not about you, we have people who are teaching how to write a resume course that have never talked to employers about how they review a resume. We have people teaching people how to interview that have never talked to an employer about what they look for in an interview. We have people teaching people how to look for work that haven't looked for a job in 20 years. That's a problem. Doesn't mean you're not a good teacher, doesn't mean you're not a good person. It just means that the odds and the possibilities of not being relevant are high. I mean, it's like, sometimes when I look at curricula and on resume writing, there's still this big section on, should it be functional or chronological? And people have this big debate, well, no, you ought to do functional, no, you ought to do chronological. I have an idea, let's do a combination. All right, so. Well, I'm just saying, you know? And so here's the whole thing. First of all, if you talk to employers, they would tell you that they prefer chronological over functional, so it doesn't make any difference what you want. Right? I'm telling you my learning. The second thing is look, with online job matching, it doesn't make any difference if it's functional or chronological, because you better have the right keywords or it's not going to work. And so what we do sometimes is that we take the lore of job getting, not the factual, locally based information that comes from employer engagement. So the first thing the law wants, and this is a major thrust, is employer engagement in program design. The second thing that they want in terms of employer engagement is that it is employers that must work with us and with the partner programs to design and develop career pathways. Now, this law is interesting because you would not necessarily think that career pathways is something that employers should care about. Because in many ways, career pathways are about how does an individual get ahead. But really, when you think about it, career pathways are of great interest to employers because they might not think of it as a career pathway, but they think of it as a talent pipeline. What a talent pipeline is where will I get the workers that I need today And where will I get them tomorrow? That's the reason why you see a lot of manufacturers who have tremendous interest in how STEM skills are being taught in the classroom, and how the focus is on math. In Tarrant County, which is Fort Worth, Texas, that's a big aerospace area, and they have a program that starts in kindergarten called "You Too Can Make a Chat," because they're trying to pump that talent pipeline. By the way, you know, I read something the other day. See if you think this is true. There's a tremendous shortage of engineers, right? But you know, in kindergarten, almost everyone wants to be an engineer. Well, isn't that what sandcastles are? Isn't that what playing with blocks are? By the way, we don't have enough nurses, but I'll tell you, 6-year-olds play doctors and nurses all the time. Of course, I'm just saying. So part of what it is how you take play and turn it into work. But here's the thing. Career pathways pump the employer talent pipeline. So that's the reason why it's not just an individual service. It also serves employers and businesses. So that's the second way they want to engage. The first one is teaching us how to design programs. The second one is how to map career pathways, and this is a major function of the Workforce Board. The third and final one is they must provide us opportunities for our participants to have work-based learning opportunities. And this includes all kinds of things. On-the-job training, which is, again, stressed in this legislation. Internships, which for the first time is mentioned specifically in the legislation. Paid work experience, which is emphasized. And the youth program, the summer youth employment program. Apprenticeship, that I was mentioning with my nephew Justin. Those are all work-based learning opportunities. The thing about work-based learning opportunities, and this may be a different thing than you have a feeling about, but the thing about work-based learning opportunities is that this is employers doing us a favor. You can cut it any way you want and try to turn it into a benefit, but it's employers doing us a favor. Because you know what we're asking people to do is to either hire or hang around people they would not have otherwise done so. That's a huge thing. But when we were talking about how do you keep people engaged longer, part of the gift we give is work experience. Do you ever work with people, and I'm sure you probably do you ever work with people who've been incarcerated? I mean, oh boy, this country is so wild. I mean, I always thought that you paid your time and it was over. That's not true. You know, if you're a convicted felon, you can't even be a barber in Ohio. Ain't that something? How do people ever turn around their lives? But anyway, don't get started on that. Here's the real thing. Is the most important thing we can give someone who's been incarcerated is the last major event in their life is work experience. Because what you desperately need is something between you and jail. Because we use whatever was the last activity as the predictor of the next activity. And so when people come to us, even if we take that person and we get them a credential, but we give them no work experience, then we haven't given them the likelihood of a route out. And so we have to work with employers and engage them on work opportunities as it relates to work-based learning. So that is the fourth and final major thrust of the law. Partnership, enhanced partnership, access for all, career pathways, and employer engagement. We're going to go through all the little details here, but if you keep those 4 things in mind, you pretty much have what the law is intending to do. Now, I've been talking at you, hopefully not trying to make it sound simple, because I don't think it is. But I would love to hear from you of those 4 change agenda items. Which one of those, or ones of those, do you think might be the greatest challenge for us? Partnership, barriers, career pathways to continuous engagement, and/or employer engagement.
Employer engagement.
Why do you think so?
I think for years we've just depended on employers to provide us job descriptions, and we would try to fit the square peg in that hole.
I think that's true. So we sort of blew our rep, if not careful. Our reputation might be a thing. But I think there's another thing also that's really important about what you're saying. This is the reason why I don't think I explained this as well as I would like, is that we have put so much of our stock in employer services as opposed to employer engagement that we've lost something here. See, really, we're going to go to employers and ask them for advice, not just ask them for a job description. I think that's a whole different thing, because there will be people who say, well, you know, while I'm there and picking up a job description, I'll just ask them a couple questions. But you see, some people don't want to work with you. They just want to tell you what to do. That's not a bad thing. And I will tell you, people love to get advice, give advice. And if you call an employer and you say, I'd like to come over and pick your brain for a moment about what our job readiness class ought to include, you will get a very different response than if you go over and say, we'd like to list your job. And by the way, they might not even have a job to list. See, employers can give us advice and employer engagement even if they're not hiring. And so this is a fundamental shift. And here's the thing. We're going to have to figure out, and when I met with the Workforce Board leadership on Monday, this is what I talked with them about. We're going to have to figure out who's responsible for not employer services, not business services, but who's responsible for employer engagement. And the law is fairly clear that that's the local workforce board, but I'm with you, sir. This is absolutely one of the greatest challenges. And I think one of the greatest challenges on employer engagement is getting them to give us workplace learning opportunities. It's a huge one. What else do you think might be challenges in terms of what we've talked about so far?
People with barriers.
Yeah, how's that, sir?
They want a job yesterday, especially the bigger the barrier, the faster they want to get. Don't you have something I can do today? I don't want to hear about classes or training or this, that, and the other. I just want a job. And getting them to come back in and follow through.
Do you think that's only people with barriers that feel that way?
I think more so.
Maybe so. Maybe. I will tell you, sometimes what we're certainly doing, particularly with people who've been not successful in traditional school, to tell them that we want to send you back to what you didn't like the first time is weird, right? But you're actually saying something very important that I talked with the youth team about this morning. Stepping stones don't have to be education to training to job. They can be job to training to education. They can be job to education to training. You can mix up the stones. What you do have to do, though, is to stick with people throughout the stones. And actually, the big movement that we want, that is not always possible here, is the proven success element is when you stack these services concurrently. When there is a work-based component simultaneously with a class component. And I think it is a big challenge around that, because I think our programs are not always designed to permit people to accomplish more than one thing at one time. And I was telling the youth folks this morning, Some of this is about the fact that the world has changed. You folks are being nice, although some people have their phones out. That's no problem for me. You know why? Because I might midway want to pull my phone out too. And you know why? Our attention spans keep getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And you know, so I always like the presenters who go, now put your phones away. I never say that. You know why? Because it's hopeless, number one. But number two, I'm not a fool. I know the world has changed. And literally, the people get their phone out, and they're doing all this stuff, and they're listening, then they go here, then they talk to their neighbor, then they go back here, then they talk to their neighbor, then they listen some more, then they write down, then they doodle. How am I doing here? Right? I mean, well, it didn't used to be that way. It used to be that people would. But you know, you didn't know, for those of you who can't sleep, the worst thing you can do is sit in front of a computer before you go to bed. You know why? Right? So here's the thing. Many of our programs still have sequential stepping stones in a multitask world. And this is a big program design issue. So I think really in many ways, all four of these are challenges. And for those of you who think this is too theoretical, it may be, but if you understand these four thrusts, the requirements then make sense. If you don't understand these, it looks like one more thing that Congress pulled out the rear. You know what I mean? And so those are the four things: partnership, barriers. See, I'm doing the review now, so that if you ignore everything I said, just capture this next 2 minutes, you got it. Yeah, it took an hour to get there, but here it is. It's partnership, barriers, career pathways, and employer engagement. And that we no longer have as our purpose just job getting. That our new mission is skill attainment with credential documentation for the purpose of career pathway jobs. Everybody got it? All right. Oh, look, I picked up the mic. Where's my thing? Wrong piece of technology. You want this back? Sure. Oh, cool. All right. You can't keep it, though. I bet it costs a lot. That would be my guess. All right. For those of you who don't like all my theoretical stuff, let me just tell you what Congress said. If you look on page 5, what I've produced here on pages 5 and 6 is the purposes of the law. And on the left-hand side, in fading away gray, wasn't that cute? Fading away gray, is the WIA purposes. On the right-hand side, the blue sky side, the looking upward side, is the WIOA purposes. Now, the first thing we're noting is which column has the most stuff. Our purpose overfloweth. That Congress has great big visions for us, and it is a lot more, right? Now, if you look at it, though, the reason we don't have to spend a lot of time here is because we covered this. Because if you look at the purposes on the right-hand side, they reflect very much the discussion we just had. However, if you look on page 6, here's something we did not discuss in as much depth, although I think was important, and it is this issue of post-secondary credentials. One of the changes in the law, and I think I said this earlier, is that the belief is that a high school diploma is great, a GED is great, but a high school diploma and GED without something else is not sufficient. So this issue of post-secondary credential is a big issue. Now, this is probably obvious, so think of this as an after-lunch softball. What is a post-secondary credential? I mean, there's obvious ones and probably ones not quite so obvious. What's a post-secondary credential? Well, everybody understand what secondary is. That's
Associate's degree.
through 12. What was that?
Associate's degree or.
Associate's degree is
A
post-secondary
state
credential. What else?
State certification.
Well, they just said, well, thank you for taking care of my nephew. Yes, absolutely. The apprenticeship is absolutely in one. What else?
Diploma.
Diploma of where?
Like a community college.
Absolutely. Or a certificate training program that employers recognize. All of those are post-secondary credentials. So it's not to say one is better than the other. It just says it has to be GED plus. And that's a big issue. Yes?
Would a CDL be one as well?
But what?
A CDL?
Well, I'm not
First
sure.
driver's license.
First driver's license. For
Yes. No.
That's occupational.
I don't know. you heard real time, I can't make up my mind. I would assume it is some kind of credential because,
It's a licensure.
It's not a post-secondary credential.
It's not what?
It's a license.
Well, yeah, I think it is a license, but here's what I'm struggling by. It probably happens after school, right? Is it post-secondary?
Oh, yeah.
Is it post-secondary?
Yes.
Is it recognized by an employer?
Yes.
Required by the employer.
Yeah.
Job to change without it.
You have to be over a certain age to attain it. But to me, there's really two criteria here. Is it post-secondary, and is it a credential that is recognized by the employer? So I'm going to go back to yes. I don't have specific information on it, but I would think that that's right. Do you want that to count?
I'd like that to count.
Well, then I think we should put you in charge. Yes. Go on. A what?
No.
All right, this is a hard one. Did you hear what he was talking about? This is the National Career Readiness Credential. Here's the problem, buddy. No, you're a smart guy. That is absolutely the right question to ask. Everybody know what the National Career Readiness Credential is?
Yes.
Yeah, and this is where you're like some kind of medal, bronze or platinum or gold or silver or onyx, whatever all the levels are. And I think it's really a good thing. Now, here's the problem, buddy. It is employer recognized. Yes, but it does make a difference. There's enough employers to have it recognized. Is it post-secondary?
Yes, it can be.
But it's like the CDL, it still can come after your original. The CDL. That's right, so I mean, it still can happen.
Well, wait. There's different questions being asked, although all of them are good. The first question is that if you had a high school diploma and you got the NCRC, then I think there may be some people who would say that is a post-secondary credential. However, the problem is we don't have the regulations to clarify that. What you're saying is really important because I think that in many ways the NCRC is a very important credential for people to have. But I'm afraid that it is not seen as a post-secondary credential. It is employer recognized, but not post-secondary.
So CDL was not the.
Well, I don't think that's true. One is school-based and the other is not school-based. And I'm not trying to be argumentative with you because I don't get to write the rules, and we'll have to see what the rules say. But there is a difference between truck driving school leading to licensure and taking the NCRC. But I'm hoping we will be able to count the NCRC. But my guess is we will not. The current WIA legislation does not permit us to count it. So we'll have to see whether WIOA will permit it. So that's a big change. All right, about the same time the law was adopted, the President and Vice President released what was called the Job-Driven Workforce Vision. And many of the provisions that this law talks about is included in this report, which is not surprising because the President and his team influenced the legislation in Congress, so much of what they issued in the report ended up in the law. And there's some of these we've talked about, and there's others we'll just briefly touch on. the thing worth noting is since this report came out of the administration and the Department of Labor is part of the administration, it means that when they are writing the regulations, they will probably use this report as much as they will use the legislation to define the regulations. So we look at this to inform us as to where the United States Department of Labor may be headed in terms of the law. And so the first point is engaging employers. We've already talked about that. The second point is earn and learn. And this was the issue of combining the stepping stones that this gentleman brought up in terms of work-based learning and education learning happening at the same time. The third one is measurement matters. And this is what I was referring to, how they intend to compare program to program using the same performance standards to see how each program performed. But we haven't talked about this next one, which is smart choices. How many of you believe that if you look only a little bit harder and you had the energy to do so, you could probably find a better cell phone plan? It is like so above my pay grade. It's really, really tough, right? All right, let me give you one more example. You know, one of the things that's been the best thing in my ever-growing age is that I so love my smartphone. I don't know how I ever lived without it. You can know anything at any time, and, you know, it's like you have a curious mind. It's great. But the web in general is like so fabulous. It's like, I don't know, do any of you do this? Like, if you're going to buy a product, the first thing you do is you go on the web and you look all the reviews. And you know, like a whole bunch of them are made up and everything. And it doesn't really make any difference. It doesn't really, because you're trying to get informed, you know what I mean? And it's like, you go on Priceline, you go on Reddit, and you can compare prices, and you can do all those things, and you just feel like a smarter consumer. And so like when I go into the store, I'm ready. You know what I mean? And the salesperson says this, and I say, oh yeah? Whip out my phone and say, you take this, you know? And so this is really about that we're really living in a very sophisticated world. And by the way, this is not just due to education levels or anything like that, because actually, to a large degree, we no longer have a poverty digital gap, we have an age digital gap. That's really what's happened in the world. So all of our customers, it's not like they're not on there. I remember some people go, oh, there's a computer challenge. You know, you ever seen the smartphones going on in the waiting area? It doesn't mean that we don't have to help people sometimes with computer skills, but the world requires information to navigate. What this says is that sometimes people choose schools in weird ways. How do people decide what school to go to? You can give me the good answers, or you can give me the real answers too. How do people decide where to go to school?
There was a 5-to-1 female to male ratio with the.
I shouldn't do this. Without William in the room. So we had lunch with William, and my friend and I were driving back with him.
Plus, they accepted me.
What was that?
Plus, they took me in.
That's right. Whoever will take me is another one. But William, I said to him, because he's a nice guy in the whole world, and I asked him, you know, how he got down here, because, you know, he was up in New York for a while, and he said he went to school down here, and I said, what school do you go to? And he said, school. I said, oh, how'd you decide that school, William? He said, I came down here, and these were the best looking women I ever seen. There you have school choice. So I think you and William need to hang out with each other. So people get in all kinds of things. It might be degree, it It might be what you want to study. It might be where your friends went. You know what mine was is that I was the first person in my family to go to school, and so I was always told I was going to college. I had no idea what I was supposed to do once I got there, but I was supposed to go to college. And so you know how my decision was. My decision is which state university was the furthest away from home that my parents would still pay for it. So here's the thing, people make their own weird decisions. By the way, do you ever have people who come into the center and say, the trust school sent me down here because they said you would pay for school and it starts on Friday. Can you write the check now? Can you write the check now? You know? All right. So sometimes it's school lure. All right. Here's the legislative provision to try to deal with that. Beginning July 22nd of this year, any approved training provider that we are going to pay for people to go to school must report to us on items such as how many people start the program versus how many people complete the program, how many people graduate, how many people get a certificate, and how many people get a job because they graduated and got a certificate. And this is part of the president's bigger plan to do report cards for colleges and universities across the country. So what is intended here is as we're talking with people about school, that we can become true advisors using fact-based information to help people make smart choices. Now, sometimes people can have smart information and still make dumb choices. But we have the responsibility, both as a taxpayer and as a responsible professional, to ensure, to the degree we can, people make wise choices. And this is a huge change, and it's also a very controversial one, actually, because there's a lot of training institutions who are not necessarily in favor of this kind of accountability data display. And so that's a big thing. We talked about stepping stones, about opening doors, and then the final note here, and this is something I am so glad I'm here in the Council of Governments today. And you want to hear something else that you folks should be very proud of here in North Carolina, is beyond the fact that you spent all the time on integrated services delivery, about how to get the two partners together, Wagner, Pizer, and WIA. Of all the places I get to work in the country, you're one of the places that best understands the concept of regionalism. There's individual communities, there's individual counties, but we have a common destiny. We have common economy. Sometimes customers even have the nerve to cross county lines. No, they do, don't they? No, don't think people ever come to your center and go, that's not what they told me at the other center. And then shop around to the next center. Just keep hoping they find out where their sister went. Eventually they're going to find her. And so here's the thing on that, is that, look, economies are bigger than counties. Employers recruit across county lines. People get on the interstate and cross geographic boundaries to be able to get a job. And so what this law says is that we have a responsibility working together as a region. It's not a merger, because we want to have sufficient variety in each locality, but there are things that can be done more efficiently and more effectively when done together than done alone. And you really, here in the greater Piedmont area, that's what this is all about. The reason I'm getting the opportunity to work with you today is because, what is it? We have 6 workforce areas that have come together under a similar umbrella, each maintaining its own identity while better attempting to serve a broader economy. And it's another place you're ahead, because you know some of these places, Do you know how many workforce boards there are in the county of Los Angeles? Any idea? There's 8. There's the city one. There's Foothills. I love the name of that. They feel like they're treated like the foot too, you know? Foothills, that's like Pasadena. And then there's Burbank. And there's Anaheim. And it goes on and on and on. And you would act like you are just creating the heresy of life if you say, hey, yo, you might want to work together. I'll never forget. So I'm doing training in Los Angeles, and we're talking about this whole concept of regionalism. We're right outside of the Los Angeles freeways. Anybody remember the Los Angeles freeway? It says, oh, you got something coming. I mean, this is like, you ever seen the Jetsons with all the, that's what it looks like. So here it is. I'm training all these people in the room about the importance of collaboration. The freeway is right outside. It is like bumper to bumper, and people are trying to tell me why it is important that we only work in our area, while everybody else is trying to get to another area. What's that about? You know, what world do you live in other than a self-focused one to not recognize that we're all dependent on each other? So this is a big thing. It's written into the law. In the law, we not only have a local plan, but we have a local plan as a part of a regional plan, and no local plan can be adopted without the region's plan being adopted. Big stuff, right? So that's at least what this administration thinks. So the next few pages I won't go through because they're really just reinforcement of what we've talked about. This page simply says that our evolution is we're now focused on credentials for career pathway jobs, that we're trying to help workers feed the talent pipelines of employers. For those of you who want more information on career pathways, you might want to take a look starting on page 11. And on page 12 is the actual definition in the law of career pathways. What's interesting for those of us who care about policy is, remember when I told you there was 4 titles and how they wanted 4 core partners? This definition of career pathways appears in Title II, Adult Education and Literacy. But it is described as our responsibility in Title I, because what they're attempting to do is to create an interlock between the 2 titles to attempt to create partnership. And so then finally, this is a chart that I stole from a national organization with permission, and it shows career pathways. What I think is important about the chart is that it has both work-based learning and classroom learning, and it shows how multiple partners help create the stepping stones. So I know that I spent a fair amount of time on the big picture, but how many of you think some of the big picture changes are big? Everybody with me? And that's what's important. So let's take a stretch break, or if you choose, you can slap your neighbor back to consciousness. I'll see you back here in about 12 minutes, and we'll move on to the mechanics.
I would do it to her, but she would do it to me.
That's right. Make it happen. Good, how's it going?
Everything going good?
I could not see. I know you need new glasses.
I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm good. What they're saying is my one-word employment plan is not going to get any I mean, I had the one dude today. I put down laborer. That's what he's been doing. I don't think that's what they got in mind. Nah, appreciate it though. So how did it over a bit? I think it was nice this weekend. All right. So yeah, I bet it's gonna be kind of cool there. Don't go right ahead. You do it anyway. Not no anymore. There you go. There you go. Yeah, that's right. You got the right idea. That's a vacation card, right? Brian White says, well, sit down with him.
I think so. Along with that.
We got this packet's pretty thick though.
How you
Afraid I want you to send me the note.
You got it.
Oh, you did? Oh.
Is that the one taller than you? Yeah, the younger one's taller than you. Good, how you doing?
Oh my God! Are you serious? Wow! It's amazing. I bet I can do that here. She's that one barrier. We were so excited.
How's the half one world, Carol?
Oh, yeah, that's my thing in the car. I don't know if I want my car. Right.
Knock them off.
Okay, everybody ready? All right. Welcome back. As you'll recall this morning, I said we had 3 agenda items. The first was the big picture, the second was some of the mechanics and services of the center, and then finally brief focus on performance. Anybody have any thoughts, issues, reflections, or questions, either on things we've talked about so far or other things we've heard about WIOA where you think I might be able to help? Anything you want to bring up? All right. As long as you keep the big picture in mind, what we're going to cover now makes some sense. All right? And if you'll take a look with me on page 16, in a nutshell, this is what we're going to discuss. For years in our system, we have what was called core, intensive, and training services. Starting July 1st, we no longer have core and intensive services as separate categories. We have what's called career service. And there's only 2 service levels in the new act: career services and training services. And that's not complete truth in packaging, but I'm telling you the headline that DOL gives and Congress gives, and then I'll show you why it's not quite true. But in general, there's no longer core and intensive, so that's disappeared. There is a new list of what is included in career services. Most of the services that are in career services are services we currently provide. But what we will want to do, and you will want to do, as we're going through the list, is looking at these mandatory services and saying which ones do we have and which ones do we not have and which ones will we have to create and which ones will we have to change. And it really won't be too many, to be honest with you. But there are some there that we'll want to take a look at. The Local Workforce Board has the opportunity here to expand training services. And real briefly, because we're not going to spend as much time on this because it will depend on each local workforce board, but local workforce boards can allocate up to 10% to what's called transitional jobs. And transitional jobs is basically paid work experience for those with barriers to employment. And that's to permit people to begin to get work experience like we were talking about before. The second option is they can spend up to 20% of their money on incumbent worker training, meaning people who are currently already working at an employer and need to upgrade their skills. But there's no guarantee that those will be offered in every center or in every community because the local workforce board only has so much money and they have to decide how to spend it. All right? The next point is that most of you have an integrated services delivery customer flow in your center. Some people call it the welcome process, some people call it the talent engagement process, but almost everybody has a process where people have a one-on-one entry. It was one of the ways we redesigned the program. Because we have done so, this law will not have as much impact on you because that's much of what's intended here. And so we'll look at customer flow because there's only one element that might require change. The final thing we'll look at is there are some new eligibility requirements in what they call priority of service, and this is not just veterans, because veterans always have priority for services for which they are eligible, but this is a whole nother set of priority criteria. So that's the technical regulations we're going to look at. So, on page 18 is the list of required career services as of July 1st of this year. The first thing to notice in the top box is 2 words. The first word is shall, and that means will. That means must. That doesn't mean maybe, might have, could have. It means shall. So this is a list. but it's shall at a minimum, which means you can add to the list, but you can't subtract from the list. All right, this is a pretty long list, and we're going to visit some of these individually, but take a look at the next chart, because this is really another way to think about it. Remember I told you that they collapsed core and intensive services. Every core and intensive service that currently exists, except for one, continues to be on the list. And at the bottom of the page, in the blue, is what is new. The one service that is not carried forward is case management for those seeking training. The reason that's not carried forward is because in the old world, you had to have one core service and one intensive service before you could be permitted to get a training service. Well, now, we will see in a moment, they anticipate that people should be able to immediately be considered for training services without having to go through core and intensive. So consequently, they do not need the service that was once an intensive service of case management for those that are seeking training. It doesn't mean you can't do case management, it just means that it's not on the mandatory service list. So, what we're going to do now is to focus on some of these services. Some of them I'm not going to mention much at all because there's no real change. Some of them I'm going to spend a little more time on because I think they're the ones that are the biggest changes and the most important changes. The first two, up in the gray box, are not changed at all. But there are two new ones in the bottom box, but I don't know that they're really new. The first one is providing referrals. Now, see if you can agree with me on this. Is there a difference between referrals and information? Yeah, how's it different?
Well, if you got a referral, they really got referred.
Well, that's right.
You know they got referred. The information is just telling them, well, you go down here to see this person. That's information.
That's right.
If you refer somebody and call on the phone and actually give them the referral, and you know they went, they got referred.
That's excellent. That's absolutely right. So referrals is about making the connection, not just about telling people where to go, so to speak. So this is a big thing. Here's the reason why it's important. I think many of us skip referrals, but we are not always likely to record referrals. And the reason this becomes important is because the law requires us to share costs. Those 4 core partners are to share costs. And the way you share costs is based upon services received. And so recording referrals gives us a basis from which we can share costs. So this is something you'll hear more and more about, and it's not really something you're not doing. However, we'll want to do more of it, and we'll want to record it, because if we do not record it, then there is no basis for cost sharing. The second one is that this is new, that we are required to provide assistance in establishing eligibility for programs of financial aid. Read that as FAFSA. Everybody know what the FAFSA is? This is the application that is standardized for federal assistance. It's the gateway, if you will, to Pell. And it's a pretty important thing. We cannot afford to pay for everybody to go to school. And by the way, you know when that person came in and said, I heard you could pay for me to go to school? You won't want to say it like this, but really the truth is we don't pay for anybody to go to school. We pay for people to go to school to get a credential, to get a job in the field for which they were trained. See, Pell Grants pay for people to go to school. But we pay for people to go to school to get a job in the field for which they are trained. That's a very big difference. It's a very big thing. But no matter what, we are being expected to get more people into training, but they are giving us no more money to do so. If we help people access financial aid, we're helping them go to school, even if we don't pay for it. So we will see in a moment that this new requirement that people should immediately be considered for training services, as opposed to going through core and intensive, that really, in many places, when someone comes to the desk and says, I heard you could pay for me to go to school, the very next step is to refer them to a workshop called Finding Money to Go to School. Maybe it's a workshop called Choosing the Right School and Finding the Money to Pay for it. And that is an immediate access to training services, because the issue is not that we pay for it, but the idea is we help people figure out how to pay for it. And so that's a little slight difference in terms of the way to think about what we do. This is actually potentially a huge one. All right. Let me just open up by saying this could be a big change or it could be no change at all. It depends upon whether or not people wish to make it a big thing or they wish to ignore it. And when you see what I'm going to talk about, you'll see why some people choose to ignore it. By the way, if the state doesn't ignore it, and DOL doesn't ignore it, and the local workforce board doesn't ignore it, you don't get to ignore it. I'm just saying, right? All right. You know, right now, in your center flow, where you have that welcome process, that's when we co-enroll people, or you might call it talent engagement. What we're currently doing there, under the current law, is called initial assessment. And if you look at the gray box, this is the definition that appears currently in the law, in WIA, around what initial assessment is. But if you move to the next box, the blue box, that box adds some different language. And I have bolded the language that appears there. What has been added is the following. Initial assessment of skill levels, including literacy, numeracy, and English language proficiency, aptitudes, abilities, including skill gaps, and supportive service needs. All right. If you're going to run a program that is focused only on jobs, then the current definition is sufficient. But if you are going to move to a program that focuses on skills, credentials, jobs, then that changes the definition of what needs to be looked at. So what does this mean? Well, how do you determine someone's literacy, numeracy, and English language proficiency? This is a big issue. Now, if you go to some states in the country, currently like Missouri and Oregon, when people come into the center as part of the welcome process, one of the first things they do is they take what is known as a quick guide, which is about 15 questions on a computer-based test to be able to give an initial assessment of people's literacy and skill needs. And depending on how people do on that, that's the feed-in to Career Ready 101 and the National Career Readiness Credential. For those states, this is not new at all, because literally they do that. However, I don't think we do that in North Carolina. We don't do it in North Carolina. Now, here's the truth, though. We can't get in, Lord, please let it not mean this. That everybody comes in, we're going to say, you came in for a tape today. Ooh, we got a tape for you today. You got a letter, we got a tape. I hope that be a moment. My boyfriend's outside. Well, I hope he brought a sleeping bag. Bring him on in, we'll give him one too. Absolutely. And so this is sort of scary in a way, you know? And so here's the thing. It's such a big thing that everybody may choose to ignore it. You know, sometimes that happens. I know all kinds of ways we're in violation of the law. I mean, if you want to get real technical about it. We're not in total 100% compliance right now. I'm not telling anybody, I'm not telling your mom, I'm just saying. We're not. So it's real funny when some things come out like this. People nobody knows what to do with the language that Congress gave us. What will be interesting to see is when USDOL issues their training, employment and guidance letters and the draft regulations, is how big a thing they make of this. The other thing is no one says that this has to be a test. This could be a professional judgment. It could be a self-assessment. But what the real thing that people are trying to accomplish here is to communicate to the customer that we're about more than just getting jobs. And that's the conceptual construct and the rationale for the piece. Now, not to jump too much ahead because it all gets complicated, but everything's related to everything here. The reason this is also important is under the new law, priority for certain career services must be given to low-income people, people on public assistance, and people who are skill deficient. So the reason this is here as well is because it is the determination of who will be receiving priority for certain career services. So even if not offered here, there will have to be some place in the process where this is determined if they're going to receive a certain set of career services. So this is potentially big. It depends on how big people want to make it, but it could complicate our entry process. And it's not because we have integrated services delivery, because thank goodness we have a process in place that has something called welcome or talent engagement and a place to put this, but it could significantly change what you do. We'll just have to see though. All right. Job search and placement assistance continues here, and the only thing that's really said here is not new to most of you. It's not new for most of you, because it just for the first time says, like when we have employers come to our center to do recruitment, that's a good thing. And so for the first time, our career services have listed specifically the fact that we should be offering employer-based services through the center. And so that's a good thing. It's not a new thing. I don't think anybody's not doing that. The labor market information piece is in current law, but the blue part is what's new. And here's the thing, is yes, we're supposed to provide job listing information, all of that stuff, but we also have to provide information on the opportunities for advancement in such occupations. Well, you know what that's about? Stepping stones, career pathways. See, that's the reason why I opened with all that general stuff this morning, because once you get those themes down, you then can look at the legislation and say, well, that's why that's in there. That's the reason they're doing that, right? So that's not a big thing. I think we can do that. I mentioned this earlier. The gray part is what currently appears in the law, and this has to do with information on training providers, but don't you love the new language? Look at this. Not only do we have to provide this information, but we have to provide it in formats that are usable by and understandable to the customer. Oh. Well, I just think, look, can't you envision us with our customers sitting across the desk going, well, here's some information, love you, mean it. Well, it's sort of like sign here, 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 and here, right? Right? Well, see, this says that's not what it's about. It's like people are supposed to be able to understand this stuff. And it's like, this gets my creative juices going. Because it's probably not possible, but I keep trying to think, how can you make this information visible to people? It's sort of like, how about this for a vision? For the school, which really has very few completers, that has very low credential attainment, and of those that do complete, they don't get jobs, you show sort of like poor people with their pockets empty, entering a school, and then dropping out with even bigger holes in their pocket. Is that a visual? That might be a better way to describe it than a graph, right? And so we're going to have to think about how we're going to display the information because it is a new provision. This is probably not a new thing, but it could be an important thing. And it is that we have to give information referral on specific programs and services. And I want you to look at what these are. Now, let me have a philosophical piece here with you for a second. You know those people that I keep referring to as coming in and saying, I got a letter? You know who I'm talking about. I'm talking about claimants, right? All right. Here in North Carolina, it's true all across the country, but here in North Carolina specifically, over the last 2 to 3 years, there's been tremendous expectations for our system to focus on unemployment insurance claimants. That's the reason why the legislature created this new rule where everybody has to come in with the REA, all of those kinds of activities. And you know why? Because without making a political judgment, the legislature believes it is our job to get people off of UI to save money for the trust fund and to reduce unemployment insurance taxes on employers to become more economically competitive. And what that really means is they think that our purpose is not just job getting, they think our purpose is UI cost containment. And again, that's not a bad thing. But once you begin to do that, you begin to have other insights. There are people who believe the predominant purpose of vocational rehabilitation ought to be to get people off of SSDI. Because that's a cost-saving device. Notice here that one of the places to refer is child support. In Texas, if I am under a child support order and I'm not paying, guess what I have the opportunity to do? To go on down to the Career Center. Oh, I can tell you still love this, don't you? Oh, now you're going to have to ask what kind of letter they got. You know that sign saying no guns allowed? All right. So, I can't promise that. I don't even want to say it's going to happen. I'm just saying the door's there, right? And so that is new. All right. All right, if you like that one, get a load of this one. All right. Now, before anybody flips out, let me go through the full detail before you flip out, okay? Because it's not going to be as bad as you think it is, all right? The current law says that we must provide information regarding the filing of claims for unemployment compensation. If you look at the blue box, here's what the new thing says. Provision of information and assistance in filing claims for unemployment compensation. I was not going to spend a lot of time on this initially, but USDOL thinks this is a big thing. We don't know how big a thing, but they think it's a big thing. There is a difference between giving someone information on filing a claim and providing assistance in filing a claim. Now, I take the following position.
Can somebody tell the governor of North Carolina that?
I asked you to wait until the end. Until the end, and I asked her to wait until the end. I knew we were going to flip out here, but you'll stay with me. If you'll say, it's no problem. You're permitted to have a freak out anytime you want. I just want to, it probably is not going to be what you think it is. It's probably not going to be what you think it is, because I'm going to take the position that you're already doing this, and it is not necessarily what you're afraid it means, although it could.
I want to give them assistance. The governor says the local office cannot give a person assistance on time.
All right, now see, now you're not waiting. If you just work through it, then we can have the flip out. I don't mind the flip out. It's just I've got to have information. All right. First of all, let me start with the softball stuff. When people come into your office and say, I want to file for UI, because some people think that's where they do it, I would be willing to bet you do one of two things currently. You give them a phone number to call, right? Is that assistance?
Yes.
Is that assistance in filing a claim?
Yes.
It might not be a high quality assistance, but it is assistance.
That's information.
No, that's assistance. I think, all right, if you don't agree with that, I'll show you really assistance. Once you tell people they can file online, you tell them that?
Yeah.
File them online. Do they go over to the computer in the resource room and in some cases file?
Yes.
Do they raise their hand?
If they need your help.
All right. Is that providing assistance?
Yes.
I would take the position it is. Here is what it is not. And I am convinced that USDOL will not say it is this, not because they're trying to protect you, but because UI will not want it any other way. This does not mean resolving claims. When people come in and say, where's my check? That is not assistance in filing a claim. That is resolving an issue of a claim. When people say, where's my check? I love it. Please don't take this wrong, but this is just sort of the way people respond to, where's my check? Now the hell's I'm supposed to do? or, where's my check? I've been told I can't tell you. Or, where's my check? And you say, here's the number to call. All right. See, but none of that is about assistance in filing a claim. What that is about is issue resolution. And see, I will tell you something. You do not want to get into issue resolution. First of all, this is a highly specialized area. The decision of eligibility for unemployment assurance is really more than just law. It's a series of case findings, case studies, a whole range of things. So you cannot, unless you have dedicated your life to UI, and we have people who've done so, you can't really resolve claim issues. Moreover, it is not our job to resolve claim issues. So, I do not believe that USDOL will define this as resolving issues. Unemployment insurance does not want us, and that's what you're referring to resolve issues. But this is not about claim receipt. This is about claim filing. And so we're going to have to see where we come out, because I will tell you, If they define this as issue resolution, then UI staff will have to be co-located in the offices.
We used to be.
Yes, but that's not going to happen now because they don't have the money, they don't have the staff.
No, but assistance in filing UI claims is not resolving issues.
It is not.
No.
I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, okay.
Isn't that what I said?
Give assistance. We're not allowed to give assistance in filing UI claims. All we can do is say, here's a number, or here's a website.
Well, I think you can say, here's the number. I think you can say, here's the website. And I think you can say, here's the computer for you to file.
Right.
Right? And if people have a question about completing the claim,
That's still
I mean,
information.
filing the claim, we can answer that.
That's information.
Oh, that's right. But I think that's assistance too. You better take the position that's assistance. Because if you don't take the position that's assistance, then you're going to end up where I don't want you to go, which is on issues, claim issues. But really, I think we're doing this.
So what you're saying is this assistance is not going to be like the assistance used to be, where she comes in to do a claim, I take her to my desk and process the claim.
I am saying it must not mean that.
Right.
And I'm saying you can't do that.
Right. No.
And this lady told you the governor will take you to jail if you do that. And this must not be interpreted that way.
Right.
And I do not believe that USUL will interpret it that way. But I opened up by telling you, I don't know everything. Not everything is clear. And we will have to see when USDOL gives the requirements. I just want to tell you that UI doesn't want you to do this. And you got to remember that we have the United States Department of Labor, and in the United States Department of Labor, there's the UI people, and there's the one-side people, and the one-side people don't want to do this, and the UI people don't want to do this. I would say that increases the odds we will not do it. But we must comply with the law. So when we give people a phone number, that is assistance. You better say yes, you're in doo-doo. I'm just saying. I'm just trying to help you out. I'm trying to be your friend. I'm trying to tell you how to get there. All right. One more 2 points on this, then we got to move on because it's not going to be that big of a thing.
Then why do the UI people keep saying call the local office?
That's a North Carolina specific issue that I'm not prepared to respond to.
Just to clarify the point you made that the UI people have lifelong experience, not anymore in North Carolina.
Well, that may be. I don't know. Here's the only thing is you notice how the energy went in the room when this came up? And it's because you've been beaten up around it so much, and it's the history of things and everything. I'm just telling you, if you think that, I don't think this is nearly as big as that. Literacy and numeracy on every visit. This is much more risk-filled for me. But a lot of people in the room, because you came from a history and the culture of UI and all of the stuff that's happened on that, we still have resentment that sometimes we've been pulled out of things. And to be all perfectly fair, we have good people. So you know when I was making that bad joke about I know but I can't tell you? We do have staff in the room, in the office that could tell them. And it's the hardest part is you got somebody crying in front of you about I didn't get my check and I can't feed my family, and you think you might be able to help, and you're not allowed to help. That breaks your heart. You know what I mean? But look, we just can't resolve all of this. I'm just telling you that you are probably in compliance with this, and you better not hope it means more than this. Because if it means more than what I'm saying, then we are going to have a slug out. Yeah. And it won't be pretty. So.
Well, what about customer service?
Look, here's the question. Is it good customer service to give people better information? No, but not every office and not every staff person has the capacity to give good information. Moreover, our job is to get someone a job. Claims are important, but claims are not the reason that we exist. It's the reason you, I exist. But really, I'm not trying to be argumentative. I just want to say you're doing this, and I hope you are, and they don't interpret it as something bigger, because no matter what you wish the world to be, I don't think it's going to change. You know, but you don't even have to agree with what I say. I just always try to tell it as I see it. You know? All right, we're moving on. I think we have a moment on that. You're going to have another one coming up. Just so. Those of you who didn't get it all out of your system. All right, well, you'll have another opportunity. You'll have another opportunity. All right. All right. This is not different. Now, here's what's important. On page 28, and this is where I'm really going to just spend a moment. All right, remember I told you there were no more core services and there were no more intensive services. There was just career services. Well, this is interesting. So I show you the big list early on of what career services are, but then embedded in the law that not all career services are created equal. Because there are certain career services you can only get if we determine them to be appropriate in order for an individual to obtain or retain employment. So not everybody who comes into the center can get the services that are career services on the right-hand side. So I'm looking at this document in one of the national groups in Washington, D.C. put together. And they're trying to describe this because they've already said we have no more intensive services. We have no more core services. We only have career services. So I'm really reading ahead, trying to, because you know I'm in a life. So like this was exciting to me. I couldn't wait until I got to this section to see how they were going to describe this. They said there are certain career services that are higher intensity career services. We don't have intensive services. We just got higher intensity services. Don't chill about that. Call it pig a duck, you know? It just, what was that?
It's a change of words.
Absolutely. All right. Here's the thing. See this services that's determined to be appropriate? You know what really the practical implication of that is? It's twofold. First of all, this is definitely a case note. I mean, I'm now down in the weeds. This is when there will have to be some indication that someone has determined they needed this. And it really probably is not a very complicated case note. Because if you read what it says, services that are determined to be appropriate in order for an individual to obtain or retain employment, the case note is something like, this person needs these career services to obtain or retain employment. But there must be some case noting. But here's also what gets complicated, and I'm moving ahead. But remember, I said there were certain career services where priority must be given to low-income people, people on public assistance, and people who are skill deficient. That's this list. Which means that if people are going to receive any of these services on the right-hand column, that's when priority will take place. And we'll talk more about that. But this is really the big thing, is that while we have no core and we have no intensive, we have career services, but there are two kinds of career services. Career services everybody can get, and career services for which there is then priority and justification. Okay? So what we're going to do now is to look at the list of career services that are specific to some individuals. I already mention this one, and this has to do with individual employment plans. And the most important change here in terms of individual employment plans is that it must include career pathways. And that's this issue that I was saying earlier about it just can't have a job goal, it has to have a jobs goal, it has to be more forward-looking, and it has to think about the pathway that people are going through. The second one is, and this is new in WIOA, at the bottom of the page, is for the first time, they specifically mention internships. And here's what's important. It continues to permit work experience, but what's new is it's work experience that is linked to careers. So what that is another career pathway issue. And for those of you who are in the land of monitoring or being monitored, here's what it really means. If I come in and I see someone in work experience, I'm going to look and see what kind of job it is. Then I'm going to go back to the IEP and see what the career pathway was, and to see to what degree the work experience job fits in the career pathway. So that's the reason why the career pathway piece and the IEP piece is important. I'm really a big fan of work experience. And I do think that it's important, and the changes here is it's linked to careers. This is new. Actually, what's interesting is financial literacy services appears under the youth section of the bill, but is required as an important service in the center and in the one-stop system. Financial literacy is everything from how to open a bank account to how to get bad credit scores up, all of those kinds of things. Let me ask you, is financial literacy a workforce issue? Yeah. At least a couple of ways, right? How's it a workforce issue?
You can't get hired.
Huh?
Sometimes when they check your credit, if you have poor credit, you might not get it.
Absolutely. If I want to be a cashier and I owe $30,000, people get nervous. No, they just get nervous, right? And so as more and more people do credit background checks for hiring, then this becomes a very important prelude to hire. But there's probably another way or so of why financial literacy is important as a workforce service.
Students will quit if they have a little, even if it's 1 week little blip in their finances that they don't know how to handle, and they will quit whatever it is they're engaged in doing.
And you know, this is a big issue because when you're low income, your life is emergencies. No, it just is. I mean, it's like my tire went out. So you're absolutely right. I think there's a third issue that maybe fits exactly with yours, is that my personal life has to be in sufficient order to permit me to work. So this is a new service. So let me ask you something. Do you currently have a service called financial literacy in your one-stop center? What was that? You can refer to it. Well, actually, referral is a permissible method here. I will tell you, I'm hoping that nobody will call this, though, financial literacy. I mean, can't you imagine? You can say to your customer, hey, yo, you want a little financial literacy? I mean, from a naming perspective, it sort of stinks. I mean, how to stretch your buck when you're on UI might work, yeah.
We actually do have a workshop once every 6 weeks in our center.
Cool.
That is called, it's like financial planning, or surviving on a budget, something like that.
I think surviving on a budget is better than financial planning.
Well, it's established through our community college partnership.
You know what? A lot of community colleges, that's learning I've had this week, I'm glad you brought it up. A lot of community colleges here in North Carolina under their HRD programs have something like this. Someone told me there's some things called Money Smart, all of those. But I think those are great. And they don't have to be at the center. They have to be accessed through the center. But you should know that this is a required new career service. Yes?
Could we use, if we have a program that we have on the computer?
Yes.
Could we use that?
Absolutely. In fact, I understand that a couple years ago in North Carolina, they issued to everybody these things called Money Smart or something, and we have those.
But also connect with your partners at your big financial institutions, Bank of America, BB&T. That they have a whole division. I used to work at Bank of America. And there's a division that if you'll talk to the branch manager, he can get you in touch with them, that they'll bring somebody out to do a workshop for you.
Isn't that excellent? I will tell you something. This isn't anti-community college or anything, but I think having someone from the bank talk about this has even more credibility than somebody from the community college. I'm just saying, you know? So I think that's a wonderful resource. And you know what I really like about that, and why I'm so glad you brought it up? So many people think that we have to deliver the service for it to count. But just like referrals, we need to be finding other people to partner with to do this kind of activity. So it's great. This is a new service, though. It's the first time it's appeared as a new expectation in our career services.
Can I say
Sure,
something
please.
about that? The financial services is going to be a bigger need now more than ever, especially with the, I don't mean to say the ugly word, the unemployment, 15 weeks, and that's all you get.
No, it's true. No, but that's not an ugly word. It's only an ugly word to some people. I think you're right. And this, all right, I'm going to leave it there. I will share with you, there are states across the country who are continuously reducing unemployment insurance. And I know that you are one of them. And you're right that that will cause a financial hardship for some people. And it becomes even more important. I will tell you, it's the reason why helping people that are dislocated workers who have exhausted their unemployment insurance think through how to refinance their home so they don't lose it is a big thing. And it's pretty hard to look for work when I'm on the verge of being homeless, right? And I think that's a big thing. All right. So, it's a new service. On page 32, there are two new services in the law. Two new services in the law that are defined in Title II, Adult Education and Literacy, that is required through the one-stop system. And you see, this is another example of where the law is attempting to build partnership by taking what is defined in one part of the Act and requiring its delivery in another part of the Act. And the two services here are English language acquisition and workforce preparation activities. And if you look at the bottom, the definition of workforce preparation activities, this is the biggest run-on sentence you've ever seen in your entire life. It just goes on and on and on, but it doesn't mean it's not important. Take a look at this and see what it's about. How many of you think we have customers at the center who could benefit from this? How many of you think you're sitting next to someone who could benefit? Well, I think I could benefit from it. I can't speak to you, but I think I could get a little bit out of it, to be honest with you. What do you find interesting here about this whole list of stuff? Anybody find anything interesting?
It's like a life skills list.
Yeah. You know, that's what I think, buddy. What I'm fascinated by is the scope here. It's basic skills, it's soft skills, it's life skills, and it's all the skills that are needed for transition into and or completion of post-secondary education, or training or employment. Remember this morning when we said there was a three-leg stool here? Education, credentials, and employment. That's literally what this is saying, and this is saying this is a whole set of services that help people prepare for that. In the sessions I've done so far this week, I asked the question, does this exist? And I got two different answers. The first answer was that, yes, this is through HRD at the community colleges. The second answer was, yes, through HRD at the community colleges, but they don't include all these things. I think probably we can say we do this, but I guess because I care about more than just compliance, like I know you do, I think this is one of the principal areas of service expansion. And I think this is about partners sitting down to figure out how this is going to be delivered. By the way, how many think you can't deliver this in an hour and a half workshop?
Oh, I know you can't. It's for a long period of time.
No, this is like...
It's the whole plan, the whole time you have it.
Yeah, this is not a good insight. Yes, ma'am. And so, again, today's purpose is to give you an orientation to the law, but at some point, people are going to need to sit down, look at all these career services, and say, which ones do we need to add? Yes, ma'am. I think that's true. I tell you, I'm very much a fan of Career Ready 101. What I most think we need to do, though, is to realize that computer-based learning without support and processing does not have good outcomes. Everybody know what I mean by that? It's fine to have a computer program, but someone has to debrief. Someone has to say what you get, what you learn. That's the reason why one of the learnings about online learning is that blended learning is what works. And it's because individuals need focus to do online learning. They need structure to do online learning, but they need a way to process online learning. And that's the reason why, like Phoenix and all of those online folks have all those online chats and all of that. But even that is not as successful as sitting down with someone and saying, what did you learn? And so we cannot think of computer-based learning as a replacement for staff, but as one more tool that staff uses to reinforce. You agree with that? Yeah. But I'm glad you brought that up. I do think a lot of that is in Career Ready 101. All right, but it's new. It's new in the Act. It's a new thing we have to say we do. All right, the training services portion, I'm going to do these pages really quick because there's not much new here. As I said to you, though, that workforce boards, if they decide to do so, they can implement incumbent worker training and transitional jobs programs. And I don't know if boards will do that or not. There's only so much money. So any money you put into this is money that you can't put somewhere else. So they'll have to make a choice on whether to do that. All right. And for those of you who wanted the definition of the incumbent worker training or the transitional jobs program, that's on page 35. But one more caution, one more time. These may not be offered in your local area because they very well may not be decided to be offered by your board. All right, what we're going to do now is to talk about some of the technical eligibility issues, and there really aren't that many of them. And so I'm going to do the pages fairly quick, and we'll start, if you want, on page 37. Adults are still defined as 18 or over. That doesn't change. No change at all. The definition for dislocated workers does not change, with one small exception. As you know, displaced homemakers can be a dislocated worker. And what they have added is that spouses of members of the armed forces on active duty are the equivalent of displaced homemakers and therefore a dislocated worker.
Isn't
the adult age for WIOA?
No.
They've changed.
No, well, no, no, it didn't change. It's all, the adult program has always been 18 or older. And the youth program, for out-of-school youth, they raised it from 21 to 24, but adults have always been 18. So that doesn't change. It doesn't mean they have to act like an adult. They just have to be 18, right? We continue to have the requirement that people have to be legal to work in the country as self-attested. We continue to have the responsibility that if individuals have male body parts, and how do we document that? All right, anyway, well, we always want to document everything else. It's sort of like, I always wondered when people go, like, let's prove you're a male. Head over to the photocopy machine. All right, so, I'm just asking. I don't know.
Because I had to look this up the other day.
What was that?
The selective service registration requirement says born with male parts. So that means you could have transitioned, but if you were originally born with
Does it say born with male parts?
Yes, it does.
I thought it just said males.
That you didn't read far enough down.
Well, I never, but you're right. We live in a changing world. All right. So anyway, none of that changes. None of that changes. So really, we don't have significant eligibility changes. Now, this next page is probably not a big thing, but maybe a big thing. It depends on how you answer my question. I mentioned earlier that this law, because it values training, has changed the requirement that people have to go through core and intensive in order to get to training. In the new world, if I come into the center and I'm interested in going to school, then I must be immediately able to be considered for that. Now, you see this where it says USCOL, and then I put in quotation marks, access training immediately. That drives me up the wall. Because it makes it sound like people come in Tuesday and we write a check. And that's not what the law intends. It's not what the law says. And somebody just says sloppy shorthand. What they were trying to say there is that you don't have to have a core and intensive service before you can be considered for training. Because when we look at the law, there continues to be certain requirements to be able to access training services. So this just means people can't go through a bunch of gobbledygook before they can be considered. So there were places here in North Carolina before we began integrated services delivery that really were putting people through gobbledygook. You know, like you have to stay in job search for 3 weeks before you can get considered for training. You have to go to the resource area and find 3 proofs of a demand occupation. It was sort of like a scavenger hunt, you know. And you have to go home and write an essay on why you were good enough to be in training and all that stuff. And see, that's what they're trying to get away from. But you must answer the following question. All right, back to my example. If I heard you could pay for me to go to school at the front desk, what is the answer to that question? And by that, I don't mean all the cute things I've done today. I'm just trying to be efficient. Because the answer is, what is the next step for someone who's interested in training? Because we're trying to figure out how to get that right-hand side of direct access. So this will probably vary by center or by area, but what is the next step for someone who says, I'm interested in going to school? What was that? With initial assessment, with whom and how?
Are you talking about with employee?
Yeah, I'm saying like, I need to know what is the process step by which I enter the consideration of training. From the front desk, what's the next thing that happens?
You're referring to a WIA person too.
All right. And I can do that immediately with an appointment. All right. I think that's compliant. There are places that probably have what they call WIA orientation, or now we'll call it WIOA orientation. That would be another appropriate answer, because people must immediately be able to be considered for training. And that will be the operable question, is how much do people have to go through before they can begin to be considered? But I think we're probably in pretty good shape on this. But even now around the country, we have some folks who believe that this is a work-first program and you must have failed job searches before you can be considered for training. And that's what they're trying to do away with here. Because look, this is back to the morning discussion. You know, when I kept beaten in that the change of the program was education, credentials, and jobs, they had to have a program component that says people could enter training immediately or they couldn't meet the objective of having all of those things. So this is a big change in some places across the country, but here in North Carolina, I think you're in pretty good shape. Right? Is everybody feeling good about being in North Carolina? I've been giving you all these things about how you're in better shape than a lot of people are. I mean, I'm not saying everything's perfect in North Carolina. I'm just saying that there's a whole bunch of stuff we don't have to work on because you already worked on it. That's the good thing. All right. One more thing that's good about North Carolina. Well, there's many good things about North Carolina, but one more good thing about North Carolina is page 39. You know why I included this page? Is to tell you you don't have to worry about this at all. You can just take your pen if you want and just put a big X to this page. You know why? Let me tell you why you don't have to worry about this page. In the current law, it says that anyone who receives self-service and information only does not need to be registered into WIA. The new law takes that out completely. This is a big issue in some parts around the country because unlike you folks who go enroll everyone in Wagner Pizer, this is driving them up the wall because they spend their life worrying about who gets into WIA, who exits WIA. If you let everybody into WIA, it messes up your performance standards. See, we went through all that therapy 2 years ago. And now we just put everybody in, and we don't care. And that's all good. That's like good news. We had to go through therapy on this, but it's like good news.
You were talking earlier that there could be better standards. I mean, I've had success stories where they went to WIA school and they got school funding and went to school and we actually worked in my apartment complex as a maintenance man. But, I mean, if there's standards in place now to see what happens 12 months down the road, right. Just putting anybody in the program, isn't that going to change what your program
It's a good question.
like?
It's a good question. I'll show you the performance standards of what might change that. But here's the simple truth. Our performance standards, our performance definitions do not change. But the outcomes that are expected change based upon who we have in the program. And this is a requirement of law, meaning that if you only have certain kinds of people in the program, you have higher performance expectations than if you have a universal base. So it is highly likely that here in North Carolina, although we have not yet done this, is that we will be able to negotiate performance standards that we will not fail because there's a change in the performance-based population. And this law does even more than that. It says when we serve people with barriers to employment, that they are further ratcheted down because Congress doesn't want us to do what some people affectionately call creaming. And see, we used to spend so much time on figuring who would get in and who would get out. We didn't have any time left to help people while they were in. Right? And so really, the reason I'm including this page is like as though you don't have enough to worry about. You don't have to worry about this page. Because we've already solved this with universal co-enrollment. And if I was in a different state, which I sometimes am, we would spend probably, you know that moment you had on UI? Oh my goodness, this page, they flip out the wall. Because this goes against everything they ever thought. But we don't have to worry about it. This one we do need to worry about. Page 40. Remember when I said that there were certain career services where priority must be given? Priority is defined differently in this law. The old law used to say, if funds are limited, then priority must be given to people who are low income and on public assistance. This one says that priority shall be given to low income individuals, people on public assistance, and individuals who are skill deficient. The definition of priority is up to the governor and the local board. For me, priority does not mean 100%. The reason that's important is if you define priority as 100%, then it means that every person will have to meet this criteria, and this is probably a place where documentation will be triggered. And I would not want to define 100% as priority. It might be 51% of the people, it might be 51% of the money, and it's not because I don't want to serve these populations. I think you know me well enough to know that I have a mission drive here, and that I want to serve these populations. I just don't want us to have to be buried in paper and the documentation that would come with it. So this is important because if you remember, and this really on page 41, we already looked at this, what's being talked about here is that you can't receive the services on the right without being subjected to the priority system. And that's also true of training services. So, we will have to figure out what does priority mean. And this will be one of the early decisions that the local workforce boards will need to make is the definition of what priority is. You might find this interesting. At the top, this is not new. The definition of public assistance and low-income individuals is not new. But what is new is the definition of basic skill deficient. And remember, I think I mentioned about the basic skills deficient didn't mean below 8.9 reading level, all that stuff that was in JTPA that people continued to pretend like was in WIA. Well, here's the thing. Look at the definition here of basic skills deficient. The individual is unable to compute or solve problems or read, write, or speak English at a level necessary to function on the job in the individual family or in society. Is that clear? Here's the thing. Here's the thing. Can we all agree with this? You could give someone a tape and not know the answer to this. Right?
That's right.
So what the interesting thing that we'll have to wait and see is how's this defined. To me, this can be self-declared. This could be staff professionally judged. but we don't know the answer to that. But here's the thing, and I heard someone the other day say, well, now we're going to have Piedmont. That's not what this says. And please let it not say that. Right? So, this is important because, one more time, do you remember when we talked about initial assessment and how initial assessment had a component of a skills analysis? And so, what this law is saying is someone at some point has to make that determination so we can move forward to priority. So this is one of the issues that we'll have to track as the regulations come out. I'm not going to spend time on the next few pages because it's the entry into training services, and ultimately, if you're interested, you feel free to read them. But they're exactly almost the same as they are WIA. So that doesn't change at all. Doesn't change at all. So in a nutshell, that's what's been changed from a regulatory perspective in terms of what career services are, what the registration process and customer flow is for customers. Anybody have any questions, thoughts, reflections, or issues on any of those things that we talked about? How many think that really it's not that big of a change? Do you agree? Yes or no? I don't think it's that big of a change. I think that there's just 2 or 3 things here. We're going to have to figure out the priority of service piece. We need to make sure what is said about the UI piece, make sure what is said about initial assessment, and basically, that's about it. You want to make sure you have your financial services piece and those other kinds of career services, but I would say we're in pretty good shape, right? So we're going to spend about the next 15 minutes on performance standards. And as I told you, I'm not going to spend much time on these because they don't start until July 1st of 2016. The second thing is that this is where definitions really will count in terms of what the United States Department of Labor will issue. And we just don't know a lot. So I'm going to spend the time that we have appropriate to the knowledge level we have, which is really just an overview. All right? There are 6 measures for the adult and dislocated worker and Wagner-Piper program. The only exception to that is we're going to look at the credential measure, and the credential measure does not apply to Wagner-Piper customers. However, here in North Carolina, where we co-enroll everybody, it means that all of them apply to everybody, right? So, here's the first measure. The current measure is on the left-hand side. The new measure is on the right-hand side. The current measure measures interemployment. The language in the law is employment in the second quarter. The change here is that under the current situation, we look at the wage records to see if people are working of any length of time in any job of any hours during the first quarter. Now we look at that in the second quarter, which means that if they are employed in the first quarter and not employed in the second quarter, they don't count for us. However, they can be not employed in the first quarter and be employed in the second quarter and count for us. So this is important because one of the things that happens here is we're pushing the performance expectation period over a longer period of time, and we'll see in a moment how this is not even the longest period of time. And it's the reason why we need to make sure that we serve people while we're in the program and keep them in until they're stabilized. Because the next measure is how many people are employed in the fourth quarter. Now, this is something we're going to look for in the regulations. If you'll notice on the left-hand side, The current regulation refers to this as employment retention. And the reason it is defined as employment retention is because we look at the people who were employed in the first quarter and see how many of them were employed in the second and third quarter. USDOL may change this in a regulation way, but the new law does not have a retention measure. It simply states how many people are employed in the fourth quarter. So if it is not a retention measure, what that means is I could not be employed in the second quarter and count against me, but I could be employed in the fourth quarter, and that will count for me. To be perfectly frank with you, when you start talking about the fourth quarter after exit, this is the land of prayer. And from a social science perspective, to be perfectly frank with you, what's disappointing to me is they're attempting to create causality off of an event that took too far away. But I didn't write the law. I had a woman the other day who said, Greg, I disagree with this law. Well, that's interesting. I mean, no offense, but who cares? I mean, we're glad you have that opinion. It's just like, this is just the law. I have to follow laws I don't like all the time. All right, so anyway. I might disagree with the law. Go to Washington, D.C., don't tell me. All right. So, this is the second measure, employed in the fourth quarter. We are shifting to measuring median earnings from average earnings. And here's the thing. This is a big thing potentially, because look at over here. The way they decided earnings before was the second quarter plus the third quarter. And the new measure, they only look at wages in the second quarter. This is a little bit of a problem. The reason why it initially said second and third quarter is because sometimes when you get a new job, you're on probation and it's like 6 months before you can get an increase. So this really sort of changes that whole piece. There's another difference here, and it's too late in the day and it's not worth spending the time on. But the shift to median earnings from average earnings, from a mathematical perspective, simply means the following. That when you do average earnings, you do better when you serve more high-wage workers. Median earnings, you do better when you serve a wide range of earnings. And since we want to leave nobody behind, they changed the measure to make sure there was not a skewed incentive to serve only the highest wage earners. So see, sometimes Congress gets it right, That's what they tried to do. The fourth one is the credential measure. And just real quickly, let me give you the history of this. WIA, when adopted in 1998, did have a credential measure. But beginning about 2006, 2007, the Department of Labor under the Bush administration gave people a common measures waiver, and the common measures waiver took away the credential measure. Now this is not political or a criticism, but the reason they took away the credential measure was because they thought the only purpose of the program was to get someone a job. So therefore, you wouldn't have a credential measure because then it gets all messed up. Well, of course, this law, because it has three purposes, do I dare run a test? Since it has three purposes of education, credentials, and jobs, they had to return to the credential measure. There are two important things to note on this measure. The first thing worth noting is it is captured either while people are in the program or in 1 year after exit. This measure requires manual staff entry of credential. And unless you are a master stalker, I mean like really good, with implanted GPS in people's arms, you're probably not going to be able to get it after they exit. And that's the reason why, in general, we want to keep engaging people throughout the process of the time that they are getting credentials, because if we exit, we may be in doo-doo. The second thing worth noting is the italicized portion of the performance metric, because while the first paragraph says you can get a high school diploma or its equivalent, I mentioned this earlier, that if that's all you get, then they do not count for your measure. In order for only a high school diploma or equivalent to count, it has to be coupled with something else. Post-secondary, employment, or something. And that's the reason why the program becomes GED+. The fifth performance measure, absolutely no one has any idea what it means at all. Don't you wish you were in Congress where you could just write stuff? Not have to worry about the obligation of implementation. And what this one is how much skills did people gain while they were in the program? I mentioned to the youth group this morning, they used to have what was called a literacy and numeracy game, which means that everybody was tested, and then after a period of time they were tested to see how it was improved. Well, see, when they began to apply these measures to all the partner programs, that means that there sometimes are measures here that are not as clearly set forth how it will be applied to each program. And so what we're going to have to figure out is what this means. I'm hoping it doesn't mean universal testing and retesting, because it will be a burden for staff and for customers, and it doesn't mean much. But while we're picking on it, want to see the most interesting thing for me? Look at the very last slide. And who are achieving measurable skill gains towards such a credential or, not and, or employment. And this seems to say that people could be making skills gains toward employment through such things as workforce preparation that would count. So it is not just an academic kind of discussion. So anyway, we'll have to find out. I won't worry about it too much. We'll just have to find out. And then beginning July 1st of 2016, we will have a sixth measure, which is the effectiveness in serving employers. That measure does not currently exist, it has not been defined, and we probably won't know for a while what it means. So, that's the 6 measures, and now you understand why it is pretty much time. But people should know. Alright. I have you for 12 more minutes, and here's what I want to do. I so appreciate on a late Friday afternoon everybody hanging in, because I know some of this is more interesting than others, but it would be a shame to leave witout capturing some takeaways. So do me a favor, find a couple of people around you, and if you want to do it by yourself, that's cool too. I'd like for you to flip through your notes, flip through your workbook, and identify a couple of things that you've heard. It may be something you knew that was reinforced, it may have been a new concept, it may have been something new about the law, but just spend a couple moments and try to put on page 56, I'm not going to collect this, but put on page 56 those 2 or 3 things I'm sorry, 57, those 2 or 3 things that you took away that were most important. So spend a couple moments on that, we'll talk about it, and then we'll get on with it. What were your takeaways? What were the things that were most important about the discussion today?
I've got the phone.
Yeah, that's what we need now. I need a third one. Everybody else got, but I think it was information.
Study.
Literacy was too.
She was there. I wasn't going to eat because I got no Oh, really? Oh, wow. The girl that worked there. Martina, well, now, Douglas still on rockets with us, but if I was it's gonna be hard to do. Yeah, I mean, it's just.
Okay, let me interrupt you. What were some of the takeaways? They may have been new information, it may have been a reinforcement, may have been a concept. What were some of the things that were important to you about the discussion we had this afternoon?
Stronger relations with employers.
What was that?
Stronger relations with employers.
That's right, and employer engagement, not just employer services, right? What else? What was that? Yes. Did you hear what she said? To wait for the regs before you make a lot of changes. I did try to highlight what I think we will need regulatory clarity on. I don't think we have to wait on everything, but some things we can't wait on. We just got to figure it out. But you're right. We're going to have to check the regs on some things. How about other people? What was interesting or important?
Able to get a credential and a skill that can't be taken away from them. I like that. So.
Yeah, that you can't take away a skill and a credential, you can take away a job. And that our mission is changing to skills, credentials, and jobs. Good. What else? Any other things? How many of you got at least a little bit more information about WIOA? You do all right on that? You're the best. If you can complete the feedback form, if you haven't already done so, that would be much appreciated. I hope you have a great weekend. Thank you for coming, and I enjoyed my time with you. Good. After what?
Where was my GPS taking? Yeah, then I might go on 68.
Well, if WIA is going to pay for it, they won't have to be enrolled in the WIA program. But they should have already been enrolled in the WIA program when they entered the center.
I'll see you later.
Well, but the work experience is training. If you remember, work experience is career service. It is one of the career services in college where priority must be given, but it is not a training service. Well, it does not presume there is case management, but you can case manage someone at the intensive service level even now. And under the new environment, you would do exactly the same thing. If you have people who are students and you want to assign them, you can do case management.
Well, I got some ball of water.
Woman came in at the line and
But see, they tend to I got the list. So all
Hey, Charles, can you take that for me? Let me just be out front.
And so what you're asking is will they enter into your caseload when they enter some higher intensity career services? And the answer is probably yes. That's probably yes. But see, they can't continue to give you a budget called intensive training because that doesn't exist. So what they'll have to do is give you a budget that reflects that of higher intensity career services and training services. Does that make sense? Thanks for attending both sessions. I wish you good success. Thank you.
I have a question about what is your take
Well, I mean, in an integrated service environment, any staff person should be able to do the welcome process of co-enrollment. Any ES staff person should be able to do any function in the center because everybody who comes into the center is on both customers.
So if you're saying that they're helping those course,
well, that's only because that's the way you've organized it. It doesn't have to be, but I don't mean you personally. I don't mean you personally. But it's only because it's been organized. In a true integrated environment, your team of people who are doing training services and intensive services could include ES people, and it would be the same as the duties of any others. But if they've decided not, in the spirit of integrated services, to keep that division, they can decide to do that, but it's not integrated services.
Whether that is from the state level or the
Local level. The state policy.
Do you know what the state feels about the fact that the local areas?
Well, the state believes that in integrated services delivery, that any staff person should be on all, should be on any team and have the same obligations as anyone else.
They can't do anything
Well,
for our 100.
Well, there's nothing in integrated services delivery that requires a caseload, but there's nothing that prevents ES staff people from having a caseload.
Don't let prevent them from having cancer. I like that terminology. Because what see, the thing is when you're a staff,
How does that work?
There's certain things they don't have to do with caseload. They don't have to follow.
Well, that's only because no one has truly implemented the ISD policy.
That's what I was saying in the morning session when you said, what do we think? What do I think the biggest challenge was? It's not for me and her at our level to let go of what we've always done. It's for them. Just like when we implemented integrated services, yes, we added all the new concepts of teams and functions, and we did that, but we never truly let go of what
Well,
we used to do.
then that's a big problem.
And the people
When I
on the
met
front
with
line
the
going in the office
leadership,
every
when I
day.
met with the leadership on ISD, I warned them of that risk. And but you know, breaking up is hard to do. And I just will say to you, and I hope you can hear this right, because it's not about you, but there are places in North Carolina where what you are describing does not exist. And that's the reason why, you should know that it's not about state policy. It's about local decision. Because if you go over to Raleigh, what you're describing happens in Raleigh, because it's not dependent on who funds you as to what you do. But in some areas that never really implemented the full vision, then I think Charlotte is pretty integrated, and I think Central Carolina is pretty integrated.
What about New Hanover? In our last workforce development conference, I know that Charlotte Works and
Central
Carolina, they told me that they don't have, everybody has a caseload. Everybody, you are assigned that person.
Well, who's your local workforce area?
Regional partnership, Kathy is just.
Well, you're going to
She's
have to
fairly
work
new
with
at
us.
that, so she's fairly new at that, so she's just doing
Well,
all the
I think
old people tell her
you know,
to do.
it's like our system's really amazing. That if you don't want to do it, you can find a way not to do it.
Yeah, that's right.
And the question is, do you want to do it? And I mean, look, the whole reason for ISD is to make it better for staff and customers. And you can't just give some people new stuff and give other people no stuff.
And that's exactly what happened in our office. You're working with WI staff, it just works.
I mean, but nobody's going to come in from the state to rescue you on that. That's a local area thing. What I would urge you to do is I would urge you to have her talk to other directors that have truly an integrated environment like Pat, and to for her to make a more informed decision as to what is possible.
And you know, I was really thinking it was state.
That's what I was wondering, but like,
local area.
well, and it makes sense. I just was hoping it came from the state, and we were
Well, then you'd have
handicapped that we didn't have any choice in that. Versus the fact that.
But then sometimes we have state.
Doesn't have our back.
We sometimes have state employees who make it sound like it's a state decision.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, and because it's to their advantage.
Yeah, it's to their advantage. Now, my other question to you was, is there any kind of way that they're going to merge Wagner Pizer dollars with WIA?
No.
They won't.
No.
That's why there's a divide.
Really.
Well, but I will tell you, not that I think this will happen in North Carolina, but in Texas and Florida, the Wagner Pizer employees are given to the local board.